The Magnolia Media Podcast is brought to you by RHR Productions. Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero. And before we get started with today's episode, let's address the elephant in the room. In order to become mayor of New York City these days, in these hyper-partisan times, one more or less must be a Democrat. As Manhattan is a liberal bastion here in the United States of America, it's essentially incumbent upon one to run as a Democrat. However, ever so often, someone sort of slips through the cracks and manages to get elected to very important offices like mayor of New York City, or, for that matter, the president of the borough of Brooklyn. That's Eric Adams. Eric Adams, the former cop, who has done nothing but surround himself with police, perhaps the least popular of all of the public servants in the great city of New York. Not exactly warming himself up in any way to be mayor of New York. And on top of that, the feds have just charged him with taking bribes from the Turkish government for what amounts to about $17,000 a year. Let's talk about this. Eric Adams has essentially thrown away his political career for $170,000 spread out over 10 years. He also allowed the new Turkish embassy or whatever to be built in Manhattan and for it to be completely cleared despite failing its fire test. So we have in New York City a 35-story building that would not pass muster with New York City's fire department. However, if the building were to be set on fire at some point, people trapped inside, and the worst possible scenario were to occur, on whose head would the shame be placed, or the blame be placed? The Turkish government, obviously, but more to the point, Eric Adams. Eric Adams is not, and never has been, a Democrat. There is a party for corrupt people like Eric Adams, people who won't resign despite the incredible embarrassment, shame, and pain they are causing themselves, their families, and those around them, and the reason that he's down to just a handful of staff. They're called Republicans, the party of no shame. That's what Eric Adams is showing us. A profile in cowardice. Now, if you ask Eric Adams or an Eric Adams supporter, he's showing courage. He's standing up for himself and for what he believes is right. Taking $10 million in campaign contributions from the government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a dictator, is in no way standing on your morals. It's corruption. And absolute corruption. Eric Adams appears to have committed a series of serious crimes. And I ask you this: if Eric Adams were a Republican and there was a Republican administration in power, does anyone among us believe that he would be held accountable for anything? After all, especially with the Supreme Court making the President of the United States essentially a king, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, is selected by the sitting president. And if that sitting president were a Republican, there is no doubt whatsoever that, for one, Bob Menendez would have been put on trial and found guilty, the Democratic senator from New Jersey, or that Eric Adams would be where he is with the Southern District of New York, the feds, who got hold of his cell phone. And for the life of me, these stunts being played by his staff running to the bathroom to delete apps on their phone as if the feds don't already know what's there. Or Eric Adams expanding his iPhone passcode from 4 numbers to 6 and then claiming he can't remember the new number. 2 new numbers, too much for the mayor of New York City, the man in charge of 9 million people and seeing to their satisfaction, their happiness, their quality of life. Eric Adams was never the appropriate choice. But it has been said that the 3 hardest jobs in America are the mayor of New York, the president of the United States, and the manager of the New York Yankees. So much is expected from the people who hold any one of those 3 positions. So, on to the story of today. And before we get started, I need to define something. I need to define the term white trash, because today's episode is White Trash on Parade in D.C. White trash has nothing to do with how much money you have in the bank. White trash has nothing to do with how much education you attained. Being white trash has nothing to do with, well, where you're from. White trash is a mindset that teaches one very, very little, showing that you're basically incompetent, that your impotency controls your entire life. You're narrow-minded, racist, and you believe that despite all of your shortcomings, the white race is somehow superior to everyone else, or that America is truly a white nation, despite only being 56% white. Yeah, 56% white. And I know it seems terribly judgmental for a country boy from Eastern Tennessee to call members of Congress from Louisiana and other southern states white trash. But anyone paying attention to Representative Clay Higgins and MAGA Mike Johnson the last days, it's suffice to say, you know what I mean when I point out white trash. And this is white trash being paid handsome salaries with no tax, and that includes no tax on a home in D.C. and a home in their district or state, depending on whether they sit in the House or the Senate. Think about it. Clay Higgins has, well, we'll get to Clay Higgins in a moment, when we can understand him through his lisp and that incredibly fake accent. As a man who has visited Louisiana many, many times, I have never heard an accent anything like that in Arkansas, Mississippi, or Louisiana. Clay Higgins is a joke. And he is dying. He is dying inside. We can see the smoke coming out of his ears to call Haitian migrants the N-word, to call Jasmine Crockett the N-word, to call Vice President Kamala Harris the N-word. And MAGA Mike Johnson is empowering it all. Isn't he a swell fellow? He just needs to pray on it. Well, pray in one hand and in the other, and see which one fills up first. In fact, white trash could be the new name for the former party of Lincoln. After all, they are the ones using low IQ voters via Fox News to poison their fragile, overwhelmingly white audience's mind. Or minds. I can't really figure that one out. Anyway, on we go. As it was clear earlier this week that Representative Higgins wanted to use that N-word so badly that his tiny brain was to the point where we could see it overheating as he avoided calling innocent legal migrants from Haiti a disgusting name. But if there was any doubt as to whether or not the likes of James Comer, remember James Comer? The impeachment man who likely single-handedly destroyed his party's control of the House? Thanks, Jim! Clay Higgins and Mike Magamoron Johnson, the third stringer, being sacrificed by the party to avoid the impotence and general inability to select a leader without literal fights breaking out on the House floor between cohorts. Back to the point. Obviously, they use the N-word on a regular basis in private, but nothing actually stays private anymore. When the feds take their phones at some point in 2025 for taking Russian money, we will certainly see just how often, in, quote, private, they use that sort of language to describe Haitians. Again, Jasmine Crockett. And again, Vice President Kamala Harris. And even their favorite black man, Republican who long ago sold his soul, Tim Scott, Senator of South Carolina. I'm sure Tim Scott will shake it off, though, and say some scripted line written for him by one of the racists in his party that, well, rappers use that type of language all the time, so it would be a farce to act upset about it. See, even I can already predict that script. And we're at least 6 months to a year before this scenario plays out. Now, I am a white man from a southern state, and I can attest to the amount of times a day and with the casualness in which that type of language was used around me before I moved into the city. After all, I do look like one of them on the surface. I'm white, 40, and I usually wear a beard. However, I will not let them take my look away. I will continue with the short hair, and I will probably continue to wear a beard. So, in other words, fuck them. White trash is the only way to really describe people like Marjorie Trader Green, Lauren Boebert, Touch Me Here, Matt Gaetz, the guy who took children across state line for sex-fueled drug parties, or drug-fueled sex parties. Anyway, you get the point. Matt Gaetz is sort of a lowlife, let's just call it what it is, a piece of shit. And the rest of the MAGA party, once known as Republicans, let us be clear, Republicans have been this classless and racist for a long time. Circa 1965, when they embraced the angry white folks foaming at the mouth over the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. If you remember, Lyndon B. Johnson, a Southern Democrat himself from Texas, said that signing the Civil Rights Act would essentially hand the South over to Republicans for the next 50 years. And it was a little under 50 years when Obama won North Carolina in 2008. Kentucky has had a Republican governor now. He's on his second term. North Carolina has had a Democratic governor for the last 8 years and will almost definitely have another one for the next 8 years. So Lyndon B. Johnson was sort of looking into his crystal ball a little bit, wasn't he? Because we're right in that 45 to 60 year period since the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, both which have been gutted by this version of a Supreme Court, the Supreme Christo-Fascist Court. The only real change was Trumpism coming. It came along and gave them permission to behave in such a vile manner. In short, they don't deserve to be in Congress, namely those from Louisiana. But let us not forget the pony from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, America's most infamous traitor since the Civil War. Something she and her constituents think never really ended. It, just ended or is going to start up again just any day now. Only districts like hers would starve if not for federal dollars. So Civil War would just ensure liberals, rational people, and all those opposed to another civil war, for Christ's sake, would, eat well, eat at all, and sleep better. And as we use the money earmarked for these backward people to pay down, the deficit. Yes, the Civil War, we can stop paying, to keep Texas and Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi on the government teat. And we could just use that money instead to pay down the deficit. I mean, what would it take? 10 years? And the deficit would be at $0 if we zeroed out every single penny we send to these red states, starving for another civil war because they didn't get beaten bad enough the first time. And it's been over since 1865. Yes. Put me in the policy chair for a senator or at the White House. Oh, I don't see that one happening. The number of people in the Southeast, my part of the country, who think the Civil War was a profile encouraged by those slave owners when it was anything but a profile encouraged by those, slave-owning states. And the idea that they celebrate it down here is absolutely mind-blowing. And remember, I was born here. I wasn't born in New York, despite the last name. I wasn't born in Chicago. It just doesn't take a deep thinker to realize that, the slave-owning states were wrong. The Civil War was not fought over states' rights. It was fought over slavery. And yes, that's a state right up to a certain point. But federal law needed to be in place to ensure our democracy and the country that eventually became the shining city on the hill actually had some semblance of fairness. Instead of things like Rosewood or the Tulsa Massacre or... You get it. African Americans in the United States have never gotten a fair shake, and that's because, white trash votes. And the number of people who would be considered white trash would drop precipitously if their leaders, the people who, completely abandon them the moment they are elected to office, and they're almost uniformly Republicans, although there are a couple of Democrats. I mean, Joe Manchin is hated in West Virginia because, he did things like poison the water and dirty up the air so that his son, could kick him some money from his little coal company, his little natural gas company as on the side. It's no big deal. And then you have Kyrsten Sinema. Oh, Kyrsten Sinema. Where to even start with Kyrsten Sinema? First of all, I thought the House of Representatives allowing Ilhan Omar to wear the headdress, the cap, was a little out there. For one, it's a religious symbol. I'm not okay with religious symbols being shown on the floor of the House, the Senate, or frankly, anywhere in the federal government or a state government, because it is blatantly unconstitutional. They are not running a church. They are running a government. If some of those people who live within the boundaries of that nation want to have religious views, fine. That's okay. Hell, in some cases, it's good. I don't know what case that might be, but hypothetically, it's good. Isn't it? Maybe. Anyway. But that doesn't mean that the United States government has to sponsor that nonsense. It doesn't. But when I see Kyrsten Sinema dressed up like I don't know what, there's really not a comparison. There's not a fair comparison to, I don't know, a coked out porn star. When you see her dressed that way on the Senate floor, killing things like a $15 hour minimum wage, killing things like, the promotion of justices to higher court benches, or the promotion of generals and admirals to protect this nation. I see her doing things like that and then making sure she gets in the elevator to ride with all the Republicans. We know that Jill Stein and Kyrsten Sinema, they're frauds. The Green Party is a fraud. And for that 1% or less of people out there voting that way, come on, be serious. Especially when you have a vice president who served under a president who passed the largest investment in clean energy in world history. Because the United States, we do it big or not at all, apparently. So back to Jimmy James Comer for a moment. Remember this fucking clown? Well, he's at it again, opening an investigation that will make him the butt-ass of jokes for the rest of his short term in power, or possibly even in the House of Representatives, as he launched an investigation into American ally President Zelensky getting to tour a munitions plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Oh my God. Jamie Comer. You have 3 or 4 months left, less than that, in power. And this is how you're going to spend your time? And what exactly do you intend to do? Arrest the president of another country, an ally, who's fighting Russia so we don't have to? And I know this is cutting off the Russian money that's flowing in. Or maybe it's, I don't know, enhancing the amount of money Russia's spending. Or maybe Vladimir Putin and his thugs are thinking, you're just not worth the investment. Not only are these lawmakers whores, they're cheap whores. I mean, if you're going to do something like betray your country, if you're going to do something like betray the NATO alliance or betray America's place in the world, at least get effing rich off it. How much did Comer get? I don't know. 60 grand? Great. Great. He can buy half a Cadillac Escalade. Not a whole one. Half of one. I wish we were kidding about this, but this was the guy humiliated by Congressman Jared Moskowitz on a daily basis when his impeachment probe of the greatest president of my lifetime, Joe Biden, blew up in Jimmy Comer's face. Like Wile E. the Coyote. That's kind of what I think of when I think of James Comer. Because every time he opens that lid, that Acme lid, explode, boom, right in his face. Every time. At least, that's the way it appears to me. And it happened every day for 18, 19, 20 months of investigating perhaps the squeaky cleanest man in Washington, D.C. And never mind the fact that Mitch McConnell, one of the most hated Republicans in the history of the U.S. Senate, is 100% behind James Comer. Never mind that. Never mind that he's the man responsible for your supermajority on the Supreme Court. Never mind that he's the man who led Republicans through, the turmoil of having to actually be in charge of something for all those years when President Obama was in office. Yeah, that Mitch McConnell. That Mitch McConnell has been completely sidelined. He is still the minority leader. That bloodbath can begin if Republicans really do win the Senate. Rick Scott wants the job, but so does John Cornyn. Maybe we'll just, throw switchblades out on the Senate floor, set a timer for 30 seconds, sort of a Hunger Games style selection. I think Republicans would enjoy that. I mean, after all, they're the ones calling for public executions. Yeah. Public executions. They don't want to take us back to the 1930s. They want to take us back to the 1230s. Yeah, I mean the 13th century. They want open and unpunished murder. Every day, that Kentucky congressman has continued to drag the Republican Party of Kentucky into the gutter. The white trash party being thrown into the Speaker's house in that swamp called Louisiana. I hear they're serving swamp rat. Yum. I hear that's Clay Higgins' favorite. His favorite. That's my best Clay Higgins impersonation, my favorite. I like swamp rat. We was raised on swamp rat down in Louisiana. Look, I have ties to the state of Louisiana. There are people I met in the state of Louisiana who left a lasting impression on me in a positive way. And some in a negative way, some in a positive way. But you take the good with the bad. Same is true for Mississippi, Alabama, obviously Georgia, and North Carolina is literally just down the road, 45 minutes away or so. Asheville's an hour. Asheville, by the way, an absolutely lovely city. Again, I hate to sound like I'm basically an advertisement for, or making an advertisement for the Chamber of Commerce in Asheville, North Carolina, but we are talking about a premier city. It's not that big. The greater Asheville area is probably 500,000 people total. and the really liberal part is just the city and the immediate suburbs. You won't see a Trump sign anywhere. And it's amazing because this place just popped up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. And again, it's absolutely stunning. Every direction you look, especially from up on high, is another view that almost gives you faith in some sort of divine creation. We know there was no divine creation, but it is incredibly beautiful. I hope that the city continues to grow. As it grows, it will remain progressive, as cities do. But it's often overshadowed, well, always overshadowed by the Charlotte, Wilmington, Raleigh and Durham, even Winston-Salem, or Kannapolis, because now Kannapolis matters for electoral reasons. Kamala Harris, I believe, is going to win the state of North Carolina. After all, Biden only lost it by 74,000 votes. And of course, he really had, he had heavy African American support. But in 4 years, you lose more old white people and you gain more young, diverse people who come of voting age. 74,000? Yes, there could be that many in the state of North Carolina. Plus, we're going to have a whole lot of rational Republicans that live in a state like North Carolina just not vote. Or vote for Kamala Harris. And those who don't vote for Kamala Harris and refuse to vote for Trump will write somebody's name in. Look, a vote for anybody other than Kamala Harris is a vote for Donald Trump. So I'm not saying to anyone or promoting the idea of writing someone's name in if you just don't like Kamala Harris for some reason or another. Let's actually talk about it. Think about inflation, which we've had to fight tooth and nail to get down to 2.2%, which, by the way, the Fed's target rate is 2%. So inflation can never really go away or, well, the entire financial system collapses. Then you can't even cash your paycheck, so what good is it? However, price gouging is still going on. And who do we think is going to be more effective on price gouging? Donald Trump, who is a price gouger? A man who bankrupted casinos? A man who bankrupted more brands than I can list. We just don't have that much time. From bottled water to steaks to an airline that never even got off the effing ground. A man who wants to throw a 10% tariff on everything. So, if your bacon is $5, it will be $5.50. And they'll likely price gouge you on the inflation too. So let's just round it up to $6. Now I know decent bacon costs more than $5. I'm just using it as an example. I mean, on Bill Maher, they kind of tried to explain it, or Al Franken tried to. He wasn't as eloquent as he could have been, but he used the analogy of, this 60% tariff Donald Trump wants to put on China. China. That's somehow going to be paid by China. Huh? Why would the Chinese pay 60%? What? And this is going to somehow create a huge amount of money for the U.S. government to use. No, that's not how this works. The man thinks that political asylum and mental asylums are the same effing thing. You really have to be as stupid as he is. You have to be far more stupid than he is, because even he hired the right people to help him manipulate the tax code to hold on to some, crumbs. And now he's got this scam going with his little Truth Social organization, which is really just a stalker. It's just a tracker for the election. That's it. If that stock shoots up to $40 a share, watch out. We might all be in trouble. But with it trading closer and closer to $10 or below, in another month it could be a $5 stock, and then it's headed for penny stock territory. DJT Media, the latest grift, brought to you by the 45th President of the United States, convicted felon, Dementia J. Trump, traitor-in-chief. And when he talks about President Zelensky, an incredibly brave man, a man who really should have had the green light. And if there's one criticism of Joe Biden when it comes to this war in Ukraine, he should have given Ukraine the green light to go hard at Russia. Do what you've got to do. The Russians will, talk about nuclear war and nuclear weapons all day, every day. But they know their nuclear stockpile is 40 or 50 years old, in some cases even older. And they don't want to fire one at Europe or any other NATO country because, perhaps the man with the biggest ego in the world, even though he's only about 5'4", Vladimir Putin, he values his own existence. And there won't be a world in which he can exist if he makes the mistake of firing a nuclear weapon at anyone other than, China or North Korea. And even then, who knows? If he were to use one in the war with Ukraine, that's going to affect Poland. And if it affects Poland, it affects NATO. And if it affects NATO, it affects us. NATO has kept the Western world stable for the last 75 or 80 years. The idea of walking away from it because Donald Trump has some grievance, this failed businessman who's spray-painted Rust-Oleum number 45, who puckers his mouth like a little asshole. The man who's being shot at by his own supporters. Come on. We can do this. Get out. Tell a friend. Make sure everyone's registered to vote. And make sure they're voting for Kamala Harris. For Christ's sake, it's time we have a woman run this country, especially one with impeccable credentials, with impeccable style, who's incredibly engaging. And it doesn't hurt that she's an attractive woman. It doesn't hurt. There's a certain sensuality to Kamala Harris, which is going to be a strength on the world stage. And I guarantee you this, when flat-footed, the two of them, Vladimir Putin and her, look each other dead in the eyes because, frankly, they're about the same height, she will control that dynamic. It's not as if she was born yesterday, or that she doesn't know how to handle thugs. And I never heard Donald Trump use the term transnational gangs. I think he thinks that's a gang that has a passport for multiple countries and had a sex change. I swear I do this podcast just to entertain myself sometimes. A transnational gang, so that's a gang that was born a genetic female but became a male. The same thing with political asylum and mental asylum. The only thing about the mental asylum thing is that's true. He really doesn't know the difference. The man doesn't know how to govern. That means it'll be left to people like Stephen Miller, or I can't find my brand of eyeliner, J.V. Vance. If there's ever been a J.V. senator, it's J.D. Vance. An absolute humiliation. Every day he arrives to the Senate, which I'm willing to bet, looking at his record, that he's not there very often. And I'm talking about before being selected to be Donald Trump's chief slave, that he made fewer appearances in the Senate than, Marco Rubio. You know, the guy who missed 90-something votes in a year. And it happens. You know, for one reason or another, there's an emergency in your state, especially when your state is a swamp like Florida that's going to be underwater in the next 20 years anyway. And you have to, go, to Southern Virginia. So you're out of line of the storm and report on the storm and reach out to your constituents and, do all those things a senator's supposed to do, like constituent services. Although I haven't heard a word from Rick Scott or Marco Rubio on this catastrophic hurricane that's recently hit Florida, that's dumping rain on us all the way up here in Tennessee. We're usually insulated from most of the hurricanes that come up through the Gulf or the Atlantic. It's North Carolina, the Wilmington area, South Carolina, down near Charleston, that takes the brunt of the, hurricanes when they come through. But it's even affected us here, as 50 people were trapped on a hospital roof in a hospital in the Nashville area, which of course is much flatter terrain than East Tennessee, which is essentially the side of a mountain everywhere you go, which gets, it gets a little old too. We do have some of the most beautiful views in the world, though. I mean, you have no real rights to your body, no Medicaid expansion if a family member gets sick and you lose your insurance through work or don't earn enough money to get a rebate on the Affordable Care Act website, just in case something were to happen. In a state where they're sabotaging the public school system, so you can't send your children to school here. You certainly can't send them to private school because they're definitely going to be indoctrinated with a bunch of religious mumbo jumbo. But we've got pretty views. All right, plans for the podcast coming up. If you want to support the podcast, please help us stay on the air. We want to keep bringing you an aggregate of what's going on in the world. Again, it's straightforward news. We obviously have a good time picking on Republicans, but, we don't hold back when Democrats mess up either. Obviously, we are a left of center. I might even call it a liberal podcast, the only one of its kind existing in the southeastern United States. We're a lone voice out here in the woods. And if you want to support us, again, patreon.com/the Magnolia Media Network. We get to 500, just 500 people. 500 people that give $5. We're going to start putting content behind a paywall. And boy, can I really let loose when I'm, doing content that's behind a paywall. Exclusive just to Patreon members. You can also check in on my Instagram. I'm on almost all the time. We've had an interesting day today on Instagram at Magnolia John 2024. I try to do a live every day, usually early afternoon, because I want folks to, kind of see. I love the interaction. I really do enjoy the medium. We need to move it over to YouTube, but we're just not quite there yet. We like to get those numbers a little higher on Instagram before, jumping over to YouTube and expecting people to follow us. But for those of you listening with whom I've engaged on Instagram today. I'm not going to use anybody's name, even your Instagram handles. I'm flattered. Thank you very much. You caught me blushing today. You were all very kind. Nothing anyone said crossed the line. And, yeah, I guess I appreciate it, what I'm trying to say. Anyway, well, that does it for me. This has been the Magnolia Media Podcast, again brought to you by RHR Productions. All of it part of the Magnolia Media Network. So, until next time, be well, won't you?